Sir, we talked about Raskolnikov, who commits not only an actual crime but also a philosophical crime, the phrase you so aptly used. Now, call it a continuation of Raskolnikov character or reflection in Dostoevsky's magnum opus, Brother Karamazov. There is yet another powerful and enigmatic character, Ivan Karamazov. Ivan walks a further mile and declares that if there is no God, everything is permitted. Now, I am curious to hear your thoughts on this character and his philosophies.
As I said earlier in our conversation, what happens in Dostoevsky's fiction is a certain kind of personality or character reappears in a new avatar. But there is a basic thread that binds the characters, who have these resemblances. I would say that Dostoevsky was probably re-examining this very notion of a philosophical crime or transgression, first in the character of Raskolnikov, and then by using the character of Ivan Karamazov in the novel The Brothers Karamazov. And one of the probably the best known sentences in the entire writing of Dostoevsky is the one you mentioned, that if there is no God, everything is permitted. Now, like Raskolnikov, Ivan is also an intellectual, and he has made his name already in the literary and the student circles of the time by writing an essay and publishing it. And this statement has its relevance in the very particular context of the novel, because Mitri, who is called Mithya, the other brother, he is claiming the property and the legacy from his father Fyodor, who of course is a very villainous kind of a person. And then there is Aloysia, who probably has chosen a religious way of life as his future. Now, in this context, the question that Ivan is facing is a philosophical question. And the question is, what are the roots of moral behavior and a behavior which may not be very detrimental to the society in which we live? Now, there are many possible explanations. One is that our ethics and moral behavior should be strongly grounded in the existence of God. It would be like saying that I do not tell lies, I do not kill any human being because there is God. And the very basis of your morality and ethics would be the presence and the existence of God. But the question raised by Ivan and then later after Dostoevsky, taken up by the existentialist writers, was if, like Nietzsche, you say God is dead, or as Ivan says, what if God is only fiction and it doesn't exist? What happens to your ethics and your moral notions? Is everything really permitted? I think the novel examines this question again and again. Like Raskolnikov, he believes also in a categorization of human beings, because he believes that there is a small minority once again. And I would add here that Dostoevsky seems to be very vigorously attacking this elitism of a small class of educated young intellectuals, because that was the time in Russia where there was a huge change. One was the abolition of the system of serfdom, which was a very debated question for Russians. It also meant that the landowning class, huge class, which owned the serfs, had to make many readjustments. But there was a younger generation, a radical youth of that nation, who did not believe that this reform was enough, and they believed that very radical changes have to take place, and the one way of doing it is by destroying the existing system and the privileges and the power of the existing system. And that is the socio-political context in which I think Dostoevsky was raising these questions. The question would be, if you want to drastically bring about a change and deconstruct existing ethical notions so that you want to bring into existence a utopian society, what then should be the basis of your ethics and morality? And that's why the question is, if there is no God, is everything permitted? And I don't think there is either a single or an acceptable answer even within the novel. You can see the overall religious philosophical stance of Dostoevsky, and here I think all of us who read Dostoevsky should go by the wonderful insights given by Mikhail Bakhtin, because he says that every novel of Dostoevsky is a many-voiced novel. He uses the term a polyphonic novel. There is no monologue there, there is a dialogic form. In the sense, Dostoevsky in a way keeps outside of his narratives his own probably personal and private beliefs, religious and political, which he openly expresses in his non-fictional writing. But in the novels, each person, each character is given the fullest possible space to express his or her own ideological beliefs, you see. So, there is no question of one kind of thinking being demolished by the other, despite the aggression that you sometimes see. In this context, Ewan's question is a philosophically valid question, because the question again, as I said, is if your entire human society is based on the sense of right and wrong and morality, we should also know what are the grounds on which you have created this paraphernalia. And he dares to ask that question. As you were saying, maybe he goes beyond the boundaries crossed by Raskolnikov, and he is asking this question. What should be the answer to this particular question? There can be at least 2 or 3 possible answers to the question. One is that you assert the existence of God and continue to say that whatever problems we may have with the existing moral notions, they have to be grounded in the existence of God. The other would be, if there is no God, then the solution is nihilism, which he experiments with not only in this novel partially, but more fully in the possessed or the demons. That's the other one, where you feel that this now is like a opening of your shackles. There is nothing to bind you, there is no one to discipline you, and you are free to do what you want.
Like road to excess.
Yes. And the painful question asked is, what if you feel that, say, everything is permissible, is harassment of young children possible? Sexual harassment of children allowed? Can you say that it is also permitted? Is the killing of the father in any way justified? Here it's the illegitimate son of Fyodor Karamzov who actually kills him. But we should not forget that wonderful conversation between Smerdakov, the illegitimate servant, and Ivan, because he tells Ivan, I killed your father, the actual murder happened with my hands, but you are responsible. Exactly. And he makes it so clear, he says, because you went on saying that everything is permissible, I followed you, I accepted your explanation, and therefore I decided what's wrong if I kill this bad human being.
Ivan wanted that murder to happen.
Yes.
See, because Ivan is torn between unjustifiable virtue and unacceptable crime, and pays a heavy price for what he believes. He is so compassionate that he refuses to believe in God, for if one believes in God, he has to accept God's absence. I mean, the world is full of suffering and injustice, evil prevails, and God did nothing to prevent that. whatever one's logical arguments are, even insist that God has abandoned the world he has created, and thus he is complicit with evil. He would not admit the truth should be paid for by evil, suffering and death of the innocents. For that reason, Ivan says the big no to individual salvation when zillions of human beings are suffering unjustly. Out of his compassion, out of this compassion, I guess Ivan becomes an accomplice to the murder of his father Karamazov. In a way, he allows the murder of his father Karamazov, but then he cannot really comprehend the dangerous consequences that follow the act. He goes mad in the end, just like Nietzsche gone insane for real. And then there is Albert Camus, who warns us, when you say everything is permitted, it doesn't mean nothing is forbidden. But I think Ivan's tragic death is a result of his false belief, or
not his death, but his
of course.
He's going mad,
he's going mad.
At the end, he has a breakdown, a very serious breakdown.
Exactly.
And if you have read that section carefully, so Mardakov and even the breakdown takes a serious turn here, because what Mardakov is saying is true. He says that it's not, it's an act I did, but the motivation came from the thoughts that you gave me, and I believed that everything is permissible, and therefore I did. And he also tells him, you did not do anything to prevent this from happening, and therefore you are also responsible. So now that intellectual confidence that if there is no God, everything is permissible, brings him to the brink of a breakdown, where he has to answer this question: if there is no God, then is parricide acceptable? That I think is the way in which the narrative is constructed. Because you brought in Camus' question is also the same. If you begin with Nietzsche saying that God is dead, the question is, then why not commit suicide? If you have an absolutely meaningless, absurd world and existence, and you are thrown into this absurd world without any decision of choice of your own, then what should prevent you from putting any end to it? Ultimately, not just in the first book, Myth of Sisyphus, but in the Rebel and in the great novel, The Plague. One more solution to that question, we talked about 2 or 3, is introduced by Camus, because he says that if there is no God, it doesn't mean that everything is permissible. It means that it is now your responsibility. You can't, push the responsibility on the shoulders of God. You have to choose, and you have to choose something which may not have a very simple logical defense. But somewhere the idea that this should not harm human beings, it's not a sentimental kind of a feeling. The question is, how does this society survive? How do human beings survive? And therefore, that's one of the other solutions. Even if there is no God, it does not mean that we lead ourselves to a moral chaos, and more importantly, self-destruction. And the pity and the compassion of Dostoevsky is always accused of being very satirical, parodying people. He does that a little, all right. But isn't there this compassion he shows towards Ivan and others? And in the novel, which we may have to discuss later, The Demons or the Possessed, the bottom line is that these are not evil people. The nihilists are not evil. He's very clear about it. The nihilists are not evil, even if they create ruckus in society and use violence and murder. You can't call them abnormally evil human beings. They are basically people who believe in a kind of amelioration, improvement of society, but the means they have chosen is wrong, right? So similarly, even Karamazov, I don't think is dismissed here in this novel. Maybe he is not dismissed at all, and there are instances where the narrator keeps pointing out the very humane side of Ivan, his honesty, He doesn't even have those sensualist compulsions of Dmitri. You know? He is willing to help, he is willing to do. He may not become an Alosya, the younger brother, who is totally a Christ-like figure. But within his limitations, Evan's problem is he has accepted, and he believed he could even implement it.
Correct.
This kind of a philosophy, beginning by dismissing the existence of God, saying that everything is permissible, and then beginning to understand what could be the consequences.
Correct.
That's how
Yeah.
I would look at it.